Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the libertarian angle on the burning issues of the day. Today, I want to talk to you about what happened in Charleston, the gun massacre there, along with other issues that have arisen out of that tragedy, not surprisingly, issues regarding racism, of course, gun control, but I want to go to a deeper level on this thing and to really analyze what's going on in America today. And I noticed that Ron Paul raised the notion that there's a national sickness going on in America, and I wrote about this last week in my blog, but I want to go into it in more depth today in the 30 minutes that we have together on this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. Not surprisingly, a massacre like this raises calls for gun control. The killer used a .45 caliber pistol, killed 9 people. And so the gun control crowd, of course, seizes upon this as a standard opportunity to call for gun control. I mean, it happens every single time. And so it's important that even though we libertarians have addressed these issues over and over again, it's important that we repeat them, because if we don't, if we remain silent, then the left, the gun grabbers, will do everything they can to make inroads into gun rights in America, which as I'll show you in a few minutes, would be an absolute disaster as far as a free society is concerned. But let's just start with a basic principle. Murderers don't obey gun control laws. Okay? I mean, that to me is like a no-brainer. I mean, there's this notion that if you just pass a gun control law, that will prevent people from going in there and using a gun to massacre people, because you see it's illegal, and that since it's illegal, people aren't going to do it. Well, yes, I know what you're thinking. That's ridiculous, Jacob, and it is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous mindset. I mean, in Washington, D.C., they've had gun control laws for decades, and they don't call it the murder capital of the world for nothing. And the reason for that is that murderers don't obey gun control laws. I mean, it seems so logical that if a murderer is not going to obey a law against murder, then what are the possibilities that he's going to say, well, I just noticed that there's a gun control law in the book, and I can't really violate that gun control law, so I'm going to have to figure out another way to murder people, using a knife or an axe or my fists or whatever. It's ridiculous. If a murderer doesn't give a hoot about murder laws, is willing to commit a murder despite the fact that he may end up going to jail for the rest of his life, or even getting the death penalty on a murder charge, he's not going to give a hoot about a felony or a misdemeanor conviction for having a gun in a prohibited area. So, in most of these states, it's illegal to carry a gun onto church property. And even in the concealed carry states, the rule, at least here in Virginia, is you can't carry a weapon into church unless, I suppose, that if it's the official policy of the church to allow guns there, that can be exempted. I think, I'm not really sure what the law is. Probably varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. In Charleston, in South Carolina, as I understand it, you can't carry a concealed weapon into church unless the church expressly provides it. Well, obviously, anybody with a concealed carry permit is not going to go to all that trouble. They're just not going to carry. Well, in most instances, my hunch is that most people with concealed carry permits are not going to violate the law. For one, they have respect for the law. Second, it's not worth the risk. In some instances, I assume it's a felony. In other instances, it's a misdemeanor. If it's a misdemeanor, it's still going to be punishable by at least a year in jail, potentially. And so most people are going to sit there and say, you know what, it's not worth the risk to go into church, even though the odds of getting caught are pretty small. I think most people with concealed carry permits are going to say, I don't want to violate the law, and secondly, it's not worth the risk, because if I do happen to get caught through some fluke, I'm looking at a long time in jail. So that was the case in South Carolina. So what they're really doing with these gun control laws is they're preventing people from defending themselves, and the murderer quite logically is not going to go in and attack in an area where people can fire back. If there has ever been an attack on a gun show, for example, I've never heard of it. I mean, you just don't see loonies going attacking people at gun shows. Why? Well, because people at the gun show are most likely going to be armed. There's plenty of guns there, plenty of people that can fire back. Not so with a church or with a public school or what we call gun-free zones. That these are, I mean, this is like sitting ducks. A mass murderer goes into an area, he knows almost as a virtual certainty that nobody there is going to be armed. They can't shoot back, and he just starts killing them. Now, is it possible that the people in that Charleston church would have been armed? Of course it is. If there had been no restrictions whatsoever, like on concealed carry, it's very possible that one of those parishioners would have been armed, maybe even the minister. And people say, oh, well, you don't know what the result will be. And of course we don't know what the result would be. But if you look at on the internet is filled with stories of where people have defended themselves against burglars, violent burglars, people with guns in their possession. And people have successfully defended themselves, prevented themselves from being killed, murdered by armed intruders into their house or even out in the streets, that people have been able to defend themselves. And all you need is one. I mean, if one person had been there armed, he would have had the potential of taking this guy out and saved, 6, 7, maybe all of them. But the fact is that this is what gun laws do, gun control laws. They disarm the lawful, peaceful, law-abiding citizen, the person that says, I'm going to obey the law, I'm going to respect the law, I'm not going to carry a gun into church, and he's the victim of the gun control law. Because the law has said, if you try to defend yourself by carrying a gun, we're going to put you in jail for a very long time, either as a felon or as somebody who's committed a misdemeanor. So that's what these gun control laws do. They do nothing to affect the outcome of the murderer himself. But what they do is they affect the outcome with respect to the victims, the peaceful people, the law-abiding people, the classic example are the 9 people that were murdered there in Charleston. Now, there's another level to this. The gun controller might come back and say, Jacob, no, you don't understand our argument. I got an email like this from a guy who says, actually what they're saying is they want to eliminate guns from society. And so if they eliminate guns from society, voila, the murderer can't use a gun to kill people. And they cite, instances where countries, where there's no guns in that country. Well, this is extremely problematic, this argument that the gun controllers use. For one thing, there's, 200 million firearms in the United States. That's a lot of firearms. Now, how are they going to get rid of all these firearms? You see, because they're all out there in the private sector. They're existing. They're there. Okay, well, they could, I guess, theoretically make it a felony for anybody to own a gun, and everybody's got to turn in their guns, sort of like they did with gold. When Franklin Roosevelt nationalized gold, that's what they did. They ordered all the American people to turn in their gold coins, which had been the official money of the United States for, 100 and some odd years, and they made it a felony. Now, not everybody did it. I mean, they understood that gold was the way to protect yourself from the inflationary debasement that people knew was coming, so they hid it. But the threat was always there, that if we catch you with gold coins, which had been the official money up until then, we will come after you with a felony conviction. And they did go after people. So that would be one way, hey, we're going to order everybody to turn in their guns. But immediately, we all know what would happen. There'd be a tremendous black market coming into existence with guns. Now, if you love the war on drugs, you'll absolutely love the war on guns, because we all know what the war on drugs has done. I mean, it hasn't accomplished anything with respect to people who want drugs. If they want drugs, they're going to get the drugs. They just pay a higher price. And there's no reason to believe the same thing wouldn't happen with guns. All these 200 million guns in the private sector, they don't disappear. Some of them would get turned over to the government, but others would be bought and sold on the black market. And so guess what? Guess who gets their hands on the guns? Yes, the murderers. So the peaceful, law-abiding people, people like you and me that would like the opportunity to defend ourselves, either openly armed or concealed carry or whatever, we're prevented from doing so because, again, it's now a felony to own a gun, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to get a hold of a gun except through the black market, and not very many people find that an extremely attractive way to purchase something. So but the murderers do. The murderers don't have any problem going into the black market and going into that area and saying, hey, I need a gun, and paying a higher price. So again, the murderers are not going to be dissuaded from achieving what they want, which is the gun to commit the murder. But it is going to do something to prevent people from defending themselves. Now, but let's assume that the gun controllers are absolutely right, that in the ideal world, their ideal world, guns are eliminated. Everybody turns their guns into the government, and the murderers can't get a hold of guns because there's just no guns in society. I mean, imagine what it would take to achieve that, first of all. I mean, you've got to have a massive police state. I mean, they talk about Cuba being a totalitarian country, or China, or North Korea. I mean, that's really what it would have to be. They'd have to have the authority to search your homes and your businesses for your guns, because they know that people are going to hide stuff like that. They hid gold. So in order to really eradicate the guns, I mean, to be certain about it, they got to engage in extremely scrupulous searches of people's homes and businesses and cars and so forth. And so you can scratch the Fourth Amendment away, because you can't just rely on warrants, because you need probable cause for that. That's not going to ferret out the guns that people are hiding. And so then you talk about a secret surveillance system that the NSA has. I mean, we're going to have like 10 times that kind of surveillance, because they're going to now have to be monitoring everybody's email to see if they make reference to their guns, what they did with their guns, and record the telephone conversations in case people are talking to each other about guns. And so you've got this massive police state that would have to be accomplished. But let's assume that they're successful. They search everybody's homes and businesses and their cars and their ranches and their farms, and they have ferreted out every gun that they could possibly find. That it's a society with no guns at all, except for one thing. Now, those of you that have been reading my articles for 25 years, you know what I'm getting at here. But I'm going to have a little pop quiz here on the libertarian angle here. That what is the problem that you see with respect to everybody now disarmed? That there's no more guns in society. Now that's the gun controller's ideal case. No more guns in society. You see a problem there? Okay. The problem is the government still has guns. The government still has all the guns that it wants, and all the tanks and all the weaponry and all the equipment and all the other methods for killing people. Now, why is that a problem? Well, because we all know that there come times in history where governments are taken over by tyrannical elements. Now, in their minds, they're not tyrannical elements. In their minds, they're always doing good. They've got the zeal to protect society, to maintain order and stability. I mean, we see that, for example, in Egypt today, where this brutal military dictatorship is killing people and torturing people, rounding people up, smashing newspapers, arresting people that criticize the regime, and I mean, doing everything they can to maintain their ironclad grip on power. I mean, the Egyptian military dictatorship is about the epitome of a tyrannical regime. Egypt's military dictatorship equals tyranny. Now, what does that have to do with the U.S.? Well, because it's the U.S. government that's supporting the tyranny. They're the ones flooding the Egyptian tyrants with equipment, armaments, weaponry, bullets, tanks, whatever is necessary to maintain their ironclad grip on power and privilege in that society. And so you've always got in every government this element, this mindset that orients toward a tyrannical mindset, but they never look at themselves as tyrannical. I mean, I guarantee you, if you went over to Egypt and talked to the Egyptian military brutes there, they would say, we're patriots and we're doing our best to save Egypt and so forth. And so the thing about Egyptians is that they have no means of resistance. You see, because they've achieved the gun control ideal where everybody's disarmed. Nobody is able to have guns except the government, compliments of the U.S. government that sends the guns to them. And so here, the citizen only has two choices: submit or die. You either obey the dictates of the dictatorship, or they kill you. Now, the nice thing about having a well-armed society, and this is what our American ancestors understood so clearly, this is why they had the Second Amendment, not just because under private property rights you have a right to keep a gun, but also because you have a right to resist tyranny. Now, as Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence, it's government has to do a lot of tyrannical things before people will finally take up arms. But at least they have an option. As soon as people are disarmed, that option is eliminated. Now, there's a fascinating legal opinion by Judge Alex Kaczynski, and it's in a case called Silvera versus Lockyer. I think it's Silveira versus Lockyer, I think. It's worth looking at. And read his opinion in that case. Kaczynski makes an absolutely fascinating and insightful argument. He says, if people are disarmed, if everybody in society is disarmed, that's a mistake they only make once. So you can't make it twice. Because let's assume that all the American people are disarmed and all of a sudden you get a tyrannical regime, one that is doing some very brutal things against the American people. I mean, okay, let's say they're doing what Pinochet was doing to the Chilean people, his own people. He was kidnapped. Well, he wasn't doing it personally, but his forces were, his military forces, his intelligence forces, his national security establishment was rounding up people, kidnapping them, torturing them brutally. I mean, the women, I can't even begin to tell you what he was doing to women. I mean, it was just so gruesome. Raping them. I mean, rape was a standard part of the policies there, and executing them and assassinating people. And it was all done in the name of getting rid of bad people. And who were the bad people? Communists. See, anybody who believed in communism was considered a bad person. And in Pinochet's mind and in the mind of his national security establishment, that meant it was okay. And they rounded up some 40, 50,000 of them. They tortured most of them, raped a lot of them, and killed about 3,000 of them. And in their mind, they were doing the right thing. You see, because these were not nice people that they were killing. They were people who believed in communism and socialism, things like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and public schooling and other socialistic programs. So now, what does that have to do with the U.S.? Well, the U.S. was the one that brought that coup into existence. The National Security State, the CIA, the Pentagon, they supported the coup. And then as soon as the coup manifested itself, they started flooding it with U.S. taxpayer money in support of this military dictatorship. Now, let's assume just hypothetically that happened here in the United States, that you get a regime that takes control and says, man, we need to cleanse American society of these bad people who believe in Islam or socialism or communism. And I mean, and so they go out and they start arresting them and kidnapping and killing them and raping them and stuff. All the things that Pinochet was doing, many of the things that the U.S. supported Egyptian dictatorship is doing, and everybody's disarmed. Well, this is what Kaczynski's point is. And let's say they won't even allow elections anymore. Kaczynski says, okay, American people say, oh, I guess we made a mistake by disarming. We don't have a chance to resist this tyranny. They're raping our wives and our children, or killing them and torturing them. Let's correct the mistake. Well, you can't correct the mistake. because the tyrants will not permit people to get armed. So once you get disarmed, that's it. And that's what Kaczynski meant when he says it's a mistake that a free people make only once, because you're not in a position to make it twice, because they will never let you get armed. Now let's talk about the roots of this problem, though. You know, people say, "Oh, well, it's racism." You know, well, we got to do something about racism. You know, it's ridiculous. There's been racism in this country for eons, since the country was established. This notion that you're going to get rid of racism in people is ridiculous. In this society, there are racists. There are bigots. We all know that. And this idea that, oh, you're going to stamp it out. Well, why haven't they stamped it out by now? I mean, if they were going to stamp it out, it's like the war on drugs. You know, they would have done it by now. It's clear that you cannot stamp out racial bigotry. There are certain people that are just bigots. There are certain people that are just prejudiced. And those people exist. Now, what do you do about those kind of people? Well, the answer is of the statists, the liberals and conservatives, has always been clamp down on them, clamp down on them. For example, when you had segregation laws, all they had to do, which were wrong, I mean, you know, because the state is there imposing these segregation laws, and you have to ask yourself, why were segregation laws necessary? That if everybody in society is a bigot, or if bigotry is such a huge problem, you don't need a law that requires segregation. Just let the market operate. Well, that was why the bigots needed segregation laws, because they knew that the market, the free market, that is society without segregation laws, without mandated segregation, would be a society where there would be no segregation. Now, there'd be bigots. There'd be bigots, you know, running their businesses and handling only whites or only whatever, and excluding Jews and blacks, Hispanics, or whatever. But it wouldn't be such a monumental problem. And the reason it was that free market system was a problem for the bigot was because they saw that people were integrating naturally in large sections of society. So instead of just repealing segregation laws, which is what they should have done, and of course they never should have had them, the federal government seizes on this opportunity for a power grab and says, well, now we're going to force integration. And we're going to prevent the bigot in a free market society from exercising his bigotry. And as I argued many, many years ago in an article, it's like a steam pressure cooker. That when you're denying the bigot his ability to manifest his bigotry in the marketplace, say, you know, by going into a restaurant that serves only white people, it's like a pressure cooker. You're clamping the screws down and tightening them and tightening them and tightening them, and finally it's going to blow off. You know, my argument and the libertarian argument has always been, let a bigot be a bigot. That in a free society where people are free to discriminate, it's not going to be a huge problem. For one thing, there's ostracism. You can ostracize the businesses that are engaging in bigotry, but it's not going to be a widespread problem. And we know that, again, because otherwise they wouldn't have needed segregation laws to mandate segregation. But at least then you give the bigot his outlet, where he's exercising his bigotry and his prejudice by his choices. But the market very well may be putting a penalty on this, and this is what we've always argued, that a store that sells only to white people, he's limiting his market share. And that, combined with ostracism, all of a sudden he sees his income diminishing, and his wife comes home and says, hey, how come you're not bringing home as much money? And all of a sudden he's nudged into proper behavior, you know, where he's now, you know, saying, okay, I'll sell to everybody so I can make more money. But that's the better way to handle this thing. Otherwise, the more they tighten the screws on the bigot, I think then you have a pressure cooker effect that just blows off, like with this guy in Charleston, that just goes off on Looney Tunes and says, oh, you guys are taking over America and I need to come in here and start killing you, which obviously is about as loony as you can get. But let me even take it to a deeper level. And I talked about this in my blog last, I think it was Friday, about this culture of violence that exists in the United States today. I mean, the compliments, of course, of the national security state. Now, we've had this totalitarian apparatus in place since the end of World War II. Those of you that are familiar with the Future of Freedom Foundation know I've been writing about this for many years, and I'm going to continue writing about it because of the horrific effect that it's having on American society. I mean, let's face it, there's killings every day, at least since 9/11, but even before 9/11. We had torture and all the stuff that goes with the national security state, even before 9/11. But it's come to the surface of 9/11 with this war on terrorism. They're bombing people and killing people, invading people. It's a constant. It's a constant part of American life. And I argued many years ago, this is going to have an effect. It can't help but have an effect on American society. You can't have a huge totalitarian apparatus that's out there killing people every day, with bombing of wedding parties and this group over here and that group over there. And the idea is, oh, this will affect only people over there. And so the mainstream press plays along with this. They don't show photographs of the dead, of the body parts of the people in the wedding parties, and the torture tapes are all locked away or destroyed, and everything's to immunize the American people from this culture of violence that's taking place on a constant basis. And yet people think that that's not going to have an effect here. I've long argued that this is what destroys your society. It's a cancer that destroys your society from within, not just on the out of control spending, not just the bankruptcy, but it's the spiritual corrosion that's taking place. You can't have a governmental apparatus that's out there inflicting massive death and destruction on people around the world without having an effect here. And it brings out the loonies. It brings out the crazies. I mean, look at Switzerland. Switzerland is one of the biggest armed societies in history. I mean, everybody owns guns, assault rifles in their homes and so forth. Everybody knows how to use them. Now, if widespread ownership of guns caused these kind of loony massacres, then why not in Switzerland? And if guns are the big problem, how come we don't see it there? Well, maybe the reason is because the Swiss government doesn't have a huge national security state apparatus that's spying on people, that's tightening the screws on people, and most important, that's wreaking death and destruction through assassinations, drone assassinations, snipers, invasions, occupations on a constant, ongoing basis. Their culture is not one that is inculcated this violence and killing on a daily basis, which is what the United States has. So over here you have the crazies, the loonies that come out. And what I'm saying is that in a normal society, a functional society, one that doesn't have a totalitarian apparatus to it, the crazies are there. They're always going to be there. They're in Switzerland. Take my word for it. And every society's got its loonies and its crazies. But they stay below the radar screen. And we notice them in society. I remember them when I was growing up. They're just kind of the weird people, and they're living like abnormal lives, but they're peaceful lives. They don't bother anybody, and that's why they're not locked up and so forth. But all of a sudden, you end up with a dysfunctional society, and the loonies and the crazies come out. Now, you can say, well, Jacob, but these people were really nice in Charleston. And there's no question about that. Somebody wrote me a critical email the other day saying, you didn't mention in your article about Charleston how nice these people were. My response was, well, my position is that everybody's got a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not just nice people. Of course, they were nice people. But you take the most greedy, self-centered, uncompassionate, narcissistic person in the world, I'm going to defend his right to life just as much as I'm going to defend nice people's right to life. Everybody's got a right to be, protected from being killed by a murderer, and a right to defend himself against a murderer. But you see, that mindset has been inculcated into us by the national security state, that it's okay to kill people that are not nice. I mean, we see this. Those of you that are familiar with my work know that I've raised the idea of Fidel Castro. Now, I know jokes are made about exploding cigars, they kind of making light of the CIA's assassination attempts on Castro. But it's all a way to just deny the fundamental fact that this government was trying to murder Fidel Castro. Why? He had never attacked the United States. He had never initiated terrorist attacks on the United States. He had never invaded the United States. Well, because they didn't consider him a nice person. He was considered a not nice person. He was a communist. And in fact, that's what Pinochet was doing. He was, those people that he rounded up and tortured and raped and executed and murdered, in his mind, they were not nice people. They were communists. They believed in socialism. And so, yeah, that's the mindset. Now you can say, well, what does that have to do with people in Charleston? Well, they're nice people. They're not unnice people. Well, wait a minute though. You're missing the point. From the standpoint of the loony bird, they're not nice people. They're like going to take over America. And so, like the communists were going to do, or the socialists or whatever. In his mind, there's nothing wrong with going and killing and murdering not nice people. And that's the mindset that comes with a national security state apparatus. I mean, these assassinations that are taking place all across the Middle East, they don't even know who they're targeting anymore. And there's all these accidental killings. Well, we killed this guy, but oh yeah, there was 5 people next to him, and we didn't realize they were there. And it's just this culture of constantly killing, and death and destruction. Now, people argue, well, maybe we ought to rein in the foreign policy. Yeah, maybe you should. But that's not the crux of the problem. That's not the root. The root is that you've got a totalitarian apparatus. And they'll concede it's a totalitarian apparatus. Go back to the debates in 1946, 47, and they were talking about forming this bizarre standing army, national security apparatus, CIA, that was really more akin to totalitarian regimes, because they said it was necessary to use totalitarianism to fight Soviet communist totalitarianism. Well, I question that. I think you fight totalitarianism with freedom. But nonetheless, the Cold War is over. It should have been dismantled along with NATO a long time ago, because it produces a dysfunctional society. Now, let's go back to the drug war. That here you have all these people, taking drugs in America, right? I mean, you got this big drug war that's going on. Why? Well, because, they're saying too many people on drugs. Like they just sent that guy up for Silk Road, life without parole. Like, what's the message there? Because there's this massive drug problem in America, and we want to send a message that stop selling drugs and stop using drugs. Well, the real question is, why are so many people on drugs? I mean, these are mind-altering substances. You've got this society here where, tons of people, I don't know how many, but big enough to justify a big war on drugs. Well, my thesis has always been that people are tripping out, taking drugs and all this because of this strange mindset that has the reality that they live in a free society that's got a totalitarian structure in it, and totalitarian programs like the war on terrorism and all these foreign interventions and empire and so forth. And people are, in other words, if you don't have a grip on reality, that's going to affect you. In one way or another, it's going to affect you. So you have this society that says, we're a free people. Thank God I'm an American, because at least I know I'm free. And they go to the ball games and they praise the troops and everything for protecting their freedom, while they're living under a totalitarian structure that is inculcated in people this constant mindset of violence and killing and death and destruction, and telling people that this is necessary as a part of a free society and that it's going to go on for the rest of their lives. How can that not have an effect on people? And it does have an effect on people. You can see, all the drug problems that exist in America. You see the massive suicides among young people. It never surprises me when I see a young person commit suicide. He's there thinking to himself what he was taught in public schools. I'm a free person. This is a free society. If this is the best there is, if this is what freedom is, I'm checking out. And you see the student who's the libertarian, who has a grip on reality that says, this is not a free society. This is a lie. He's in a better shape than the person who's living the life of the lie. And then most important, all this dysfunctionality doesn't just manifest itself in drug use and drug abuse. It manifests itself in terms of these loonies and the crazies coming out and doing their horrific acts. And so, yes, gun rights are important to protect ourselves against the loonies. Get rid of this mindset of gun control, but that doesn't get to the root of the problem. The real root of the problem is the dysfunctionality that has come with a society that has a government with totalitarian elements that are tightening the screws on everybody in society. Selling cigarette laws and stuff like that, just tightening the screws on everybody, and creating, if you don't mind my mixing the metaphors, a steam cooker pressure effect that periodically just blows off and ends up doing horrific damage. And so in order to get things right on track, I mean, you all know that this is what I keep doing, raising your vision to a higher level, to what do we need to do to achieve a free society, a normal society, a functional society, one where these kind of things are not taking place. And in order to do that, we've got to ask that fundamental question: what is the role of government in a free society? And when we reach the right answers to that one, then we start adjusting the government, changing it systematically in terms of its system, its structure, in order to get things right and back on the right track. That's the show for this week. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.